Are you ready to journey back in time to the 14th century and witness the horror of the Black Death? It all started in October 1347 when 12 ships arrived at a Sicilian port, carrying an unwelcome guest. The passengers were either dead or on the brink of death, with their skin covered in blackened boils that oozed pus and blood. The Sicilian authorities were quick to demand that the ships leave, but it was too late. The Black Death had already set its deadly course across Europe, leaving millions of people in its wake. This is the Fudge Network, and in this episode, we will delve into the devastating effects of the bubonic plague, which wiped out at least a third of Europe's population and changed the course of history forever. Buckle up and prepare to discover the secrets and surprises behind one of the greatest disasters in human history. Traveling across the continent along trade routes, the Black Death was not the first of its kind. Its reputation as a killer preceded it, as rumors of a frightful sickness devastating the populations of China, India, Egypt, Persia, and Syria had spread like wildfire. But nobody could have prepared for the horror that was about to be unleashed. The Black Death was like nothing anyone had ever seen before. It was unstoppable, and its effects were gruesome. Victims would first swell at the lymph nodes in their groin area or underarm regions. Then, like a twisted game of whack-a-mole, the growths would sprout into large, blackish-blue egg-sized lumps, or for the even less fortunate, expand to the size of apples. The lumps would then fester and ooze various bodily fluids, as additional symptoms such as fever, pain, chills, sweating, upset stomach, and diarrhea set in. And almost always, it ended in death. In the 14th century, the Black Death was a force to be reckoned with. It was a disease that had the power to wipe out entire communities with just a fleeting touch. Doctors of the time had no idea what was causing it, and people were terrified. Some believed it was the spirit of the deceased that carried the disease, but the real method of transmission was not yet well understood. The only thing that was clear was that the disease was highly contagious and spread like wildfire. The only places that were spared were isolated islands, cut off from the rest of Europe. The rest of the population was not so lucky. The bacterium infiltrated every city's defenses, and no one was safe. The symptoms were gruesome, and death could come within days, sometimes a week or two. Even worse, those infected could be asymptomatic, making it impossible to isolate them from the rest of society. It was a terrifying time, and the people of Europe were desperate for answers. Escape to the countryside proved to be a futile attempt for many during the Black Death. As the pandemic spread, it devoured not only humans but also livestock, killing countless pigs, cows, chickens, goats, and sheep. The wool industry was hit hard, causing a shortage throughout Europe. Some areas faced a death toll of around 30%, but the Italian city of Florence suffered an unimaginable 90% loss. The disease was so devastating that it left thousands of French villages and other locations completely empty. These once bustling places were reduced to ghost towns, and in some cases, nature reclaimed them, hiding them under surrounding forests. It wasn't until after World War I, with the help of aerial photography, that these long-forgotten areas were rediscovered as the remnants of once thriving communities. Back in 1300s, the world was a vastly different place. With a population of only 500 million people, the Black Death had the power to decimate almost half of the planet's inhabitants. Europe was hit particularly hard, with estimates ranging from 50 to 70 million deaths, and even as high as 60% of the population according to the CDC. The rest of the world wasn't spared either, with global estimates ranging from 155 to 200 million deaths. But why did the Black Death spread so quickly and with such deadly efficiency? Well, in a world where scientific knowledge was lacking, people had little understanding of the plague's causes and modes of transmission. Medical professionals of the time often had little success in treating it. While it's true that Yersinia pestis, the bacteria behind the Black Death or bubonic plague, is highly contagious, it can be spread in many ways, but contaminated spirits were not one of them. There's a wild theory that the Black Death could turn into an airborne strain, meaning you could catch it just by being in the same room as someone who was infected and happened to sneeze or cough. Yikes! But regardless of whether the plague went airborne or not, all signs point to fleas and lice as the main culprits when it came to spreading the disease. These little buggers hung out on all sorts of animals, like squirrels, rabbits, and even cute little chipmunks. But the biggest offenders by far were urban rats and their flea buddies. In fact, rats were known to develop symptoms that were disturbingly similar to those in humans. And if you were unlucky enough to get bitten by a flea, you might find yourself with a bad case of the plague too. It's no secret that rats and their fleas were the real culprits behind the Black Death. In fact, one theory suggests that the outbreak started when rats with the plague kicked the bucket, and their bloodthirsty fleas moved on to the next best thing, humans. Once a person got bitten by these fleas, they were exposed to the deadly bacteria and got infected. As if that wasn't enough, ships in the mid-1300s were infested with these pesky rodents who loved nothing more than living in dark, damp environments. So, it's no wonder that the plague spread like wildfire following the arrival of the infamous death ship in Sicily. From there, the disease followed trade routes throughout Europe, leaving a trail of devastation in its wake, and even making its way down to North Africa. But the rat-based theory of the Black Death's origin might be getting a makeover. Sure, the Black Death wasn't the only outbreak of the plague in history, but the speed and scale of its devastation in Europe is unmatched. Strangely enough, there were no reports of rats dying en masse before the outbreak, and some clever scientists think they've cracked the case. Brace yourselves, because this new theory suggests that pesky fleas and lice that love to hang out on humans were the true villains. These bloodsuckers would bite infected people and then scurry off to bite others nearby, spreading the disease like wildfire. Turns out that the Black Death might not have been acting alone. When scientists unearthed mass graves in England, they found anthrax spores hanging out alongside the plague victims. Yep, anthrax. That disease that can spread through contact with sweat, saliva, and tears, or even just by touching someone's skin. So, in addition to the rats, fleas, and infected humans, people could have been getting sick in all sorts of ways during the pandemic. It's possible that these other diseases weakened people's immune systems, making them more vulnerable to the plague. Plus, who knows how many people were actually claimed by anthrax or other illnesses, but counted among the Black Death fatalities. Picture this. It's the 14th century, and you've got a nasty case of the plague. You go to the doctor, hoping for a cure, only to be met with a bloodletting procedure that looks like something out of a horror movie. This ancient practice involved cutting into a patient's veins or arteries to let the blood flow out. The idea was that too much blood in the body caused illness, and bloodletting was believed to correct this imbalance. Unfortunately, this procedure didn't do much to help plague victims and may have even made things worse. And if that wasn't bad enough, they might also try boil lancing. Basically, a sharp object was used to lance the painful boils that had formed on the victim's skin. The idea was to drain the pus and blood from the wound to alleviate some of the pressure and pain. But if the boils weren't properly drained, they would continue to grow, and the patient could die from the buildup of dead tissue and fluids. And to make matters worse, popping the boils could actually cause toxic shock and lead to even more deaths. But the doctors weren't the only ones running scared. Priests were refusing to give last rites for fear of catching the plague themselves, and people were trying everything from burning herbs to bathing in rosewater to no avail. As it turns out, the people of Europe were genetically prone to succumbing to the disease, with only a lucky 0.2% having any immunity. The other 99.8% were left to the mercy of the plague, which killed off so many that their genes were never passed down. But there is a silver lining. Modern-day Caucasian Americans have a 15% chance of being resistant to the disease, thanks to those lucky few who survived and passed down their immunity. So while the plague still exists today, at least we've got a fighting chance. One fateful meeting with the 12 notorious death ships would go on to decimate entire communities, leaving a mark on history that would never be forgotten. But the question remains, who or what was to blame for the spread of this deadly disease? Was it the work of pesky human fleas or scheming rat fleas? We want to hear your thoughts in the comments. Thanks for watching. And as always, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. See you next time.